This is Marshall Masters for Your Own World USA, YOWUSA.com. And our program is Project Looking Glass, New York City 418 False Flag, Trump, Q, and Devolution. What we are getting from this group, this Project Looking Glass, is a series of 3 warnings in videos with attached documents, and they are painting a very, very grim picture of the future. That if we fail to take action on the information they are giving us, that the end of America begins on April 18th, 2022. This claim may make you feel that this is a hoax or an AI fabrication. What I want to tell you is that it's not. And I say this as an author, a publisher, and a researcher, and I have seen a clear pattern in these messages that actually indicate that they were, in fact, written by people doing this very kind of work. How? In poker, it's called a tell. Something they do unconsciously that signals whether they feel they have a strong hand or a weak hand. Based on this, I have decided that we need to treat this information at face value. Yes, we must acknowledge it could be a hoax, but time is of the essence, and so, as I said, take it at face value. We are given a very bold message about these 3 disclosure videos in Event 1, the first of the 3, in which they tell us if these videos are spread and shared by thousands of people, the events can be changed. If the videos are not spread and shared, then the events cannot be changed, and the most negative timeline is then solidified and set in stone. My goal in this briefing is not to tell you how to decide about this, but rather to give you the information you need to make an informed decision. And so we're going to do this in 5 parts. The first part is provenance, literally consider the source. Then in part 2, a plea for help, we're going to look at the first 2 disclosures, Event 1 and Event 2. In part 3, 2 timelines, we're going to take a much closer look at these 2 timelines they discuss, the negative and the positive. Then in part 4, Trump, Q, and Devolution, we're going to take a look at what is it that our patriots may or may not do in this situation. Because if they do nothing and it happens, it's all downhill from there. At that point, America is no longer driving the disaster, but Russia. And so in the final segment, part 5, to Russia with peace, I have a special message to the Russian people in the event that this first false flag event does in fact occur on the 18th. Part 1, Provenance. The term provenance means the chronology of the ownership, custody, or location of a historical object, which in this case simply comes down to consider the source. And before delving into the looking glass predictions of the Guardians, we must first consider the source. And to illustrate the point, I will begin with my own provenance, so to speak, and then we'll go from there. And as you can see, here's my provenance: author, publisher, media personality, emergency volunteer, and so forth, and why I would take an interest in this topic. So now, let's turn our attention on the looking glass itself. While the Guardians are a somewhat elusive group of people, they do give us very specific provenance about the Project Looking Glass device, or the artifact as they call it. And what they say is the artifact itself is Sumerian in nature, but not believed to be originally from that civilization. Now, the Sumerians were the first civilization that we know of on planet Earth, and they existed from 4100 to 1750 BCE. And of course, when you start talking about the Sumerians and technology, you are talking about Zecharia Sitchin, planet Nibiru, the 12th planet. Rather than focus on Zecharia Sitchin and 12th planet, because I'm sure that's going to stir up a little trouble with some people, let's just go to another piece of history, if you will, another artifact that does corroborate the general message that the Guardians are giving us. That artifact is called the Hopi Prophecy Rock. This dates back centuries. We don't know exactly how old it is, but in the glyph itself, it gives us the clue. As we can see down here, we have a cross over a circle. The circle represents the earth, so this is saying Christianity is around the earth. And you can see the Hopi warrior to the left. It is combat. Now, this goes back to 1540 and the Spanish conquistadors. This is when they invaded Hopi territory, and they were brutal, to say the least. So now, let's move a little further up into this, and what we see is the Hopis gave us a negative timeline, and this is the one we are presently on. And if you look at the negative timeline, it shows global domination, then there appears to be a disaster, famine, and terrible sickness, and that's it. So not a very pretty picture. On the other hand, the Hopis show us the positive timeline, where people are happy and celebrating life. They're dancing. But also notice an interesting thing about the positive timeline. It takes a few zigs and zags to get to it. And you know, that is consistent with what the Guardians are telling us about Looking Glass. But here's the one thing I think the Hopi offer us for these times that is the most revealing. Now, this is the Blue Star Prophecy, and in it the Hopi say, "Many will appear to have lost their souls in these final days. So intense will be the nature of the changes be that those who are weak in spiritual awareness will go insane, for we are nothing without spirit." And frankly, people, if things aren't insane right now, what are they? The bottom line is that this topic is not something that just popped up. It has deep roots in the collective history of our species. So, we find ourselves now, humanity is at a crucial junction. And there are only two timelines according to the Guardians and the Hopi. And those are life and peace, or death and slavery. So, in part 2, a plea for help, let's examine the warnings that we are being asked to share. Part 2, a plea for help. These warnings by the Guardians raise one simple question. Can we change the future? This is something we have seen in literature and art discussed countless times before. For example, Star Wars. When it comes to Yoda's take on the future, the Guardians are telling us it's not necessarily so. So, what if their warnings are unheeded? What are the consequences for humanity? We must first ask, who are these people, and what are they warning us about, and what, if anything, can we do about it? Who are they? We are the guardians of the looking glass. We are a group of former intelligence officers and military officials who have come together to release classified information about future events to come. What follows is the most recent, most important event we must act to change. The date of the first event is April 18, 2022. On this date, a false flag attack will occur in New York City. A bomb will be set off, killing 2,000 Americans instantly and injuring thousands. The bomb will be housed in a large van and set off on or near Times Square during a busy time. Folks, if this happens, we are going to understand that it was a false flag very quickly, which is then going to provoke a subsequent false flag event. In this second event, this plan involves the release of anthrax all over Washington, D.C. The plan will use strain 836 of anthrax, the most potent and deadly ever created. It is a strain created by Russia in the past and later destroyed by Russia. However, unknown to the Russians, the strain was smuggled out of Russia by Western assets many years ago and developed in U.S. biolaboratories. Perhaps the very laboratories that the Russians are attacking in the Ukraine. One must consider it because they know how deadly this is, and you can go and confirm about 836 and the fact that the Russians not only destroyed the lab, but they even went further to tell us about it. And what did we do? We snuck it out, and Lord only knows where it's going from there. Assuming April 18th is stopped and neither false flags occur, we'll have another critical event to consider. And this is discussed in Event 2. In Event 2, what we're talking about is there is a second critical timeline event that will happen in May of this year. Here's what they tell us. According to our data, if the April 18th event is prevented, the next date of an event that must be prevented is May 20th. On this date, an operation will occur out of the public eye, never reported in the media. Gee, isn't that familiar? This operation will take place in Southeast Asia and involve the assassination of a former Chinese military scientist. The scientist's name is Dr. Wu, and what they say is Dr. Wu's work and project, which is almost entirely unknown at this time, is critical to stopping the negative outcome and instead bringing about the positive outcome. This is why the negative forces are specifically concerned about him and targeting him. Dr. Wu's project is called Raindrop. Through his work, using quantum computing, he is able to do great damage to the European power structure in the coming years. I went to Raindrop. You can see it, and there's a picture. It's the only picture you can find of Wu down there and working on the machinery. What they tell us is that he is being targeted for elimination. And if nothing is done, he will be killed on May 20th, 2022. This leads to the cessation of his project, the confiscation of his work, his funds, and the arrests of those involved. His project is destroyed, and the negative timeline is then solidified and cannot be altered from that point forward. Now that we know what is at stake and what we must do, what about those who are driving humanity to destruction with the present negative timeline? In other words, who are our real enemies? This may shock you as we move on to Part 3, 2 timelines. Part 3, 2 timelines. The third disclosure by the Guardians is the 2030 Singularity video and article. And they use this to explain the 2 timelines, negative and positive, in great depth, as well as a cosmic event in 2030. The interesting thing is, the machine or the artifact cannot see beyond 2030. So between now and then, let us use the Hopi prophecy rock we introduced previously to help illustrate the consequences of the negative timeline as described by the Guardians. Now here's that negative timeline, and remember, it just doesn't work out too well for us. It's not a very cheery thing to look at, because the negative outcome presents a scenario in which no individual can fight or defeat what is to come. Even those who would attempt to live in the forest, in the woods, or off the land would be targeted by military drones. There was almost no escape. And now comes the heartbreaking part. They go on to say, research concluded that those in possession of the looking glass data could change future events in each of the years 2012, 2016, and 2022, if they released information to the public on certain specific dates in each of those years. The U.S. government and other entities involved were not only shocked by this, but they appeared to treat the information as a threat, as they preferred the projected negative timeline to occur without interference. What caught my eye in this paragraph was other entities. Who could these other entities be, and what is their role in all of this? And the Guardians tell us in very clear terms, be prepared to be shocked. Through all of this, the ultimate source of power located in Europe never changes. In fact, the Europeans in charge of this negative timeline outcome, who are steering humanity towards its destruction, only gain more and more power. The Europeans have dragged us into 2 world wars, and now they're going to sink us with the third. And now that we know who really is behind the satanic evil in the world, that being European crime syndicates, crime families, and Nazis, what do we make of this? Because we are under siege by dark forces. So, what about that positive timeline the Guardians speak of? What does that look like? As you remember, what the Hopi tell us is that the positive timeline is really great, but getting there is a bit convoluted, twists and turns. It always seems that way. The low road is always simple to disaster. The high road, well, it's the path least traveled. But here's the one thing they say about the positive timeline that just resonated with me, just touched my soul in a most precious way and endeared me to this information. In the positive timeline, humanity as a whole did not fight the system. They simply stopped participating in it entirely. Each individual began to make a decision to reject negative habits and the negative system in place, and instead began to make more positive choices in their lives. This is not only the way we need to approach this in the future. It is what we need to do today. And so I want to read this for you a second time because this is so important. This is the most important thing they have said. And all of this disclosure, that in the positive timeline, humanity as a whole did not fight the system. They simply stopped participating in it entirely. Each individual began to make a decision to reject negative habits and the negative system in place and instead began to make more positive choices in their lives. Furthermore, the new timeline also showed a singularity occurred in the year 2030 during a cosmic event, also foreseen in the negative timeline. Except this cosmic event had a very positive outcome, because the power structure in place was not able to engage in its destructive activities, which would lead to the cosmic event causing extreme destruction of human beings. And this brings us to the real key term here: cosmic event. The 2030 cosmic event will happen during the Planet X system flyby. Admittedly, all of this begs the obvious question. What does President Trump know about this, and what, if anything, is he doing about it? We'll address this in Part 4, Trump and Devolution. Part 4, Trump and Devolution. In Part 3, Two Timelines, we learned that in 2012 and 2016, the American government knowingly and maliciously chose death and slavery for us and much of humanity. In Part 4, I'm going to show you evidence of what I believe was a concerted effort between President Trump and the White Hats in 2020 to disclose the causality of the 2030 cosmic event, which in turn helps us to answer the question, how long has he known and what is he doing about it? That takes us back to July 4th, 2020. Everyone remembers that amazing rally at Mount Rushmore. That was a magnificent event. Interestingly enough, in the background, an anon or a white hat in the administration, somebody who had information to share, did it and leaked an image to the web that I recognized immediately as the one I had been looking for over a decade. On that day, the SOHO satellite captured an image of a large object behind the sun during a coronal mass ejection. What you see in the upper left-hand corner is Nemesis, the brown dwarf star that is the smaller companion to our own sun, and all of the smaller objects are its planets and moons. It's actually a mini constellation, but we just refer to it as the Planet X system. And the critical thing is, because timing is everything, that while President Trump was giving his speech at Mount Rushmore, Nemesis had completed its transit above the ecliptic from the southern skies into the northern skies, and this is when it becomes extremely deadly for humanity. Now, you may say, well, this is a one-off, a one-trick pony. Really? Okay, I'll take that on. Because on January 1st in Australia, this image was taken. What I liked about it most was you could see those power lines, which gave me an idea of the time, which is late in the day, and that's the only time you could see this. And when we enhance this image, what do you see? What you see is this object is clearly behind the sun. It has a sunlit side and furthermore a clear terminator. This is a natural object. Considering this, what, if anything, can former president do to shift us to the positive timeline? And this brings us to Q, devolution, and fate. Devolution is a political theory put forward by a former member of the Bush administration, Kash Patel. Essentially, it says we have a bifurcated government right now where parts of it are still being run by Trump and other parts of it are being run by Biden. And this took off slowly, but has now gained steam, and you see a lot of anons coming on board with what Kash is saying, such as X22, Praying Medic, and 107. What they all admit is it's really hard to get the smoking gun proof with things that are going on behind the scenes. And when people say, just give us one thing that backs up what you're saying, here's what they offer. It is a fact. Neither Obama nor Biden have been able to close Gitmo. And trust me, that is one thing they want to do. So what does that mean for us? Realistically, when it comes to Trump, Q, and devolution, the check is in the mail. Let's hope it's worth the wait. Meanwhile, what can we do? That's simple. We've already been given the call, and that was in Event 1. If these videos are spread and shared by thousands of people, the events can be changed. If the videos are not spread and shared, then the events cannot be changed, and then the most negative timeline is then solidified and set in stone. So, spread the word. If somebody's going to call you a kook and a conspiracy theorist, so what? And by the way, if they do call you a conspiracy theorist, consider it a wonderful compliment, because the term was invented by CIA to smear people who are speaking the truth. And they tell us we also have provisions in place so that our uploads will continue all the way to the year 2029 without interruption. We are a moderately sized group of individuals located around the world who have sworn an oath to act as guardians and do all in our power to ensure our purpose is fulfilled. We collectively hold years of training in military and intelligence operations, and we are confident that no matter how we are attacked, we will prevail. But they're going to need help. And so they tell us, despite our preparation efforts, we were shown via the Looking Glass Future data that we will need new people to help us, who will call themselves Guardians too. Over time, some of you will be chosen to join us and gain access to our classified data files. So, you can carry on the project if something happens to us. Folks, I've followed Q and the Anons for years, and I believe timeline management is right up their alley. And it could become a major effort for them if they take interest. However, what happens to us if, despite all of their efforts, or the lack thereof, by Trump, Q, and the Anons, and April 18th happens? At that point, Trump, Q, and the Anons will lose relevance, as Russia and the deep state get the upper hand. We're going to address this possibility in Part 5, To Russia with Peace. Part 5, To Russia with Peace. According to the Guardians, the consequences are clear. If we in America fail, Russian nukes will vaporize 25 million Americans. And so to Those of you in Russia, the path is clear. If we fail to act, that you will act, and it will be destructive. And there will be great suffering, and we will fall and cease to be a nation. But what will be your reward for this? Again, remember what the Guardians tell us is that the artifact, the looking glass, cannot see beyond the year 2030. And if we are on the negative timeline, we know what will happen to Russia once we reach 2031. It'll be Operation Barbarossa 2.0. Because what will happen is that the Europeans will have used Russia as their tool to destroy the United States. And then, after 2030, Russia, it will be your turn. And that will be Operation Barbarossa 2.0. And when that happens, they're going to come at you hard. And there's going to be a different circumstance for you in this time, because America will not be there to be your ally. And you will face these Nazis after 2030 on your own. Do you really think they'll let you win? Really? So my message to the God-loving people of Russia, and I'm talking about the God of Abraham, if we are to change our fate, we must act. And we must act together. I believe we can. And I also believe something physicists call the observer effect. The observer effect simply is the observation of quantum phenomena can change the result. Point being, the Guardians are observers, but we are the experiencers. And so I believe as experiencers, we may have certain latitude that they do not. So as things ratchet up, crisis builds. It's manipulated by evil people who want us all to die. I want you to think about what makes life beautiful before you commit to a course of action. Let me ask you, when you hold your child in your arms, do you say something like, "Я люблю тебя, мой котенок"? So do we. And so do all of the other God-loving, good people of the world. So before you press that button, I implore you to ask yourself one simple question. Can experiencers inject new variables into the continuum? If we can, then the next question you should ask yourself is, people, we must take one at a time. But if we cannot love our own species, who in the universe will? As a citizen of the United States, I am reaching out to the good, God-loving people of Russia. We must come together. Our motto must be Tolka Vamesti, together only. You are good people. We are good people. You love the God of Abraham. We love the God of Abraham. You fight Nazis. We fight Nazis. So let us fight them together as we did in the Great Patriotic War, and free all of humanity from this criminal scourge once and for all. I hope that one day I can meet some of you to talk about this. and I will not greet you with the usual Здравствуйте or Как дела, but rather I will extend my hand in friendship and say, Tolka vmesti. And I hope you feel the same way too. If you do, what's the next step? Хорошо сидим. And I'll leave it on that note. So, until the next time we meet, remember, destiny comes to those who listen, and fate finds the rest. So learn what you can learn, do what you can do, and never give up hope. This is Marshall, and I'll catch you on the backside.